Welcome to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm Diana Sun. With me here today is Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey. She's going to explain some of the key actions the board took at its March meeting. Actions that will affect you, your family, and our community. This month, we'll be speaking about a major new redevelopment plan in Rosslyn, changes to I66, Arlington's partnership with a prominent university, our follow-up on Snowzilla, and everyone's favorite spring topic, potholes. Libby, thanks so much again for joining us. Let's start with asking you about Rosalyn Plaza.
Sure.
Now, this is a major new development in Rosslyn, the redevelopment of an entire block. It's almost 8 acres on the eastern end of Rosslyn.
It is. It's huge.
There's 7 buildings on this block now, including our own Spectrum Theater.
Yep.
And tell us about the vision for Rosalyn Plaza.
Well, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, people can actually. I would advise them to go online and look at some of the pictures, which we may be showing here, which is great. It's really exciting. It is huge. It's a phased process, so it's going to be taking a while. And this was just, we first did the sector plan for Rosslyn, and that was, we had a lot of discussion about that last year. And this is what they call the PDSP, the Phased Development Site Plan, and we're looking at doing this project in four phases. And there were a number of things we had to approve and talk about, sort of what the envelope and structure of the whole development is going to be, and then we'll come back with site plans, so it gets increasingly more specific about what we do. The project will do a number of things. It's going to break up the site right now so that you'll actually be starting to have the 18th Street will continue on down, and you can see sort of to the river a little more. We're not going to do a wall of buildings because we really want to kind of open it up and make it welcoming.
So a
large
easier
plaza,
to get around.
Easier to get around and walk, and we're welcoming. And a lot of discussion about street trees, which are really crucial, I think, to making things comfortable for people and attractive, besides helping the air, which is a good thing. We're also doing a large plaza, and that was one of the major issues. There were really two specific issues that we talked about the most, and they both actually we had 2 amendments, and there were 2 votes. So the board wasn't agreeing on all of it, but we had really good discussion, I think, and I'm happy to talk about what those were if you'd like.
Yes. What are some of the concerns here?
So one of them was the size of the park. The sector plan that we adopted recently last year.
So that's kind of the master plan.
The overall view said that there should be about an acre of contiguous space. And when the developer came back, it was far less than an acre, more like 0.8, 0.85, so a lot less than an acre. And it wasn't, but you could get to an acre, even a little more, if you sort of allowed an L shape. And we had a lot of discussion about whether that should be what we should be okay with. The Parks Commission, not surprisingly, thought we needed more space. And the urban forestry people wanted more space. And so did the Planning Commission.
Because in Rosslyn, which is very dense, it's important to break that up with these open spaces.
Well, we need people need grass and trees. They do. So there was a lot of discussion about it. In the end, so what the idea was, the developer, of course, people were saying it's just a little bit more. It's not much. You're getting 2 million square feet of space. This isn't very much. But of course, when you move the park out a little bit and then you go up 20 stories or more, every story multiplies. So it's not just a small space, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And basically the developers pencil it out. What they told us was that if we did not if we did not agree to what they had worked out, and they had been working it out with our staff over a year or more, back and forth, they wouldn't be able to do the project. I think some of my colleagues weren't sure if that was really the case or not. And in the end, we had a 3-2 vote, and we did allow them to move forward with a slightly smaller park. But we did get them to agree that we're going to plan all of the green space. There's another section of green space over in the next phase, and get all of that space planned together, which I think can make a more sort of holistic plan for it all, which will be better and better use the space. So I'm comfortable with where we came out. That was a difficult vote, trying to figure out, is this really what we need to do? Is it really as hard for the developers, they say? in the end, I decided to trust the staff that had worked with the developer and actually had changed the designs several times to come up with that. So, as I say, that was a little bit tough, and that was a 3-2 vote with Jay Facette and John Weisstadt voting no, that they needed to be making a bigger park, and Christian Dorsey, Katie Crystal, and myself saying it was okay to go forward.
And
so it was an interesting moment. We had a lot of discussion.
And you said there was a second issue.
And there was a second issue, and that was easier for me. We again had a lot of discussion. That was in the sector plan. We actually put in that about how high different buildings can be. And for me, the key is about, and that these are guidelines. So one of the buildings, the developer asked for 5 feet more. So instead of being 270 feet high, it's going to be 275 feet high. Asking to go forward and plan for that. It still isn't approved. It'll still have to get approved in the site plan. So there's another kind of bite at the apple for the board. And that one sort of got down to, what does the sector plan actually mean? So the Planning Commission felt pretty strongly that if we'd said that the guideline was 270 feet, it needed to be 270 feet. But the board adopted a resolution with those guidelines, saying pretty clearly, these are guidelines and they should be flexible. And that if developers have got a really exciting idea that achieves our goals, the point is the goals. It isn't so much the exact numbers. It's to make Rosslyn an interesting, exciting, vibrant place where you've got good views and good vistas, and it's a pleasant place to be. If they can still meet those goals and yet change the guideline a little, the numbers that we had, that's okay. And I thought we were clear about that. So for me, that vote was not nearly as difficult. I thought we'd been pretty clear that we needed to be flexible. What we heard was that extra 5 feet would really make almost no difference to how it was perceived, how it we could still achieve our goals most likely. And for the developer, it was huge. So it was, I think, a very small thing for us and a huge thing for the developer. So I was fine with that. That, again, was a 3-2 vote. So, again, Jay Facette and John Weisstadt thought we should keep them at the 270 feet. And Katie Crystal, Christian Dorsey, and I thought we should be okay with the 275.
Well, this is a lot of discussion on these important topics.
And they are important, yeah. And there's a lot of good discussion, and then we vote and we move on.
Now, the county for some time has been working to upgrade Rosslyn and make it more friendly and open and welcoming. And this sounds like it's on the way.
I think it's definitely on the way. It's going to be a while. I mean, part of there were some other concerns about the height of the building for this what they call one engine inoperable for airplane safety. And those concerns focused on the later phases of the project that probably won't be built for 15 or 20 years.
Oh, that's an important point. So this phase development site plan that the board approved is a long plan.
It's a long term. I mean, basically, they now have, the developer has the right to come to us with specific site plans when they're ready. And when they're ready is really going to depend on market conditions and a lot. They think the first phase or two will probably be in the next 2 to 5 years. But the later phases could be out 15, 20 or more years.
So this is really a long-range vision for
It's a
Rosslyn.
long-range vision, and all of us felt that was not such a difficult discussion. All of us thought that the one engine inoperable, we do obey the limits set by the FAA for airline
and
safety.
You're now talking about FAA regulations that affect the flight paths that go
right, and the height of
Rosslyn.
the building so that they don't interfere with the planes. And they're pretty close now. I mean, people talk about being in high buildings and kind of almost waving at the folks in the airplane, which can make people uncomfortable. But the FAA does set a limit. They're actually now working on regulations for this, but they haven't come out with a ruling. The developer is required to go every 18 months and get an okay from FAA that the height they're planning for is all right. So you can see between now and 5 years, 15, 20 years, there are a lot of 18-month segments that they're going to have to go back and get an okay. And I think we all just felt that airline technology is going to change. All kinds of things are going to change, and it seemed like not now to say from this date, 2016, saying this is what you can and can't do, trying to anticipate where it's going to be in another 20, 25 years. Just didn't make sense to us, so we didn't.
Well, it's exciting that the community vision for the remaking of Rosslyn is starting to take shape.
It is. I got one more thing I would like actually to mention about it because it was interesting to me. They, when the developer comes, and our staff too, and they show pictures and of course it's meant to make it look particularly attractive. That's part of what they do, and it does look really beautiful and exciting. One particular picture really struck me, and that was of the whole site all built out, all the phases done, facing towards Teddy Roosevelt Island. That is very similar to the one I
Yes.
was thinking of, yes. And if you took the banner off that says redevelopment in Rosslyn and look past, it's all trees. And it just brought home to me how hard we need to be working to make sure we've got good access to the parkland. And that we've got to work with both VDOT and the Park Service to get some pedestrian access bridges where you could just walk over. Right now, there's a huge barrier with I66 and the Parkway.
Yes, it is.
It's like a barrier.
yes.
You can't get there. So if we could just have that access, that would just make life better for everybody, I think. So that's something we're going to have to work on. And that's going to be a long-term project, but I kind of got sort of re-energized to make sure we keep that and don't let that get off our radar scope, and we'll start working hard on it.
Well, thank you for the explanation of the vision of Rosalyn Plaza.
Well, I think people should look at the pictures. One picture is worth
Yes,
far more than 1,000 of my
absolutely.
words. Thank you.
Roslyn isn't the only thing being reshaped in Arlington. When we come back, we'll talk about the state's efforts to transform I-66 inside the Beltway and how that is impacting our county.
Now, everything you were going to do someday is on the calendar. Introducing a new day of the week. Someday. Want to retire someday? You'll want a My Social Security account to help you get ready. Get yours at socialsecurity.gov.
We're back with Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey, talking about some of the key decisions the board made at its March board meeting. Recently, Governor McAuliffe and the General Assembly worked out a compromise to build a high-occupancy toll lane on I-66 inside the Beltway that will operate during peak hours only. The project will also widen a 4-mile stretch of I-66 eastbound from the Dulles Connector to Ballston. This project is being closely watched by Arlingtonians. It includes new money from the tolls for regional projects aimed at reducing congestion on I-66 by encouraging folks to choose ways to travel other than driving alone in their cars. VDOT has committed an initial $5 million for projects that will be funded in the future by toll revenue. Now, there was a compromise on this. Can you explain the compromise to us?
I don't actually even so much think of it as a compromise as just a big change because at first we had quite a lot of discussion last year at the end of the year about this, and the idea was that they would look at possibly widening, but first the state was going to put in all kinds of efforts to make sure to try to lower the congestion on 66 using other ways, getting people onto transit, finding other ways to do it.
So moving people versus moving cars.
Well, yes, or just trying to make it all move better without making the road wider. Finding other ways to move people around besides putting in another lane. And there were a lot of pressures to widen the road. And it was actually bipartisan. And while I was surprised, and I think the board was surprised at how quickly that change happened, it was pretty clear from me looking at, both parties, it was a bipartisan push for people to say that we needed to widen. And one of the things that I think is important to remember is that the studies show, and actually I think if you ride on 66, that you notice it, the widening is only going to be up to Ballston. It's not going to be from Ballston to the river. And the fact is about 45% of the traffic on 66 leaves by then. So that they're going to be looking at widening it going just up to Ballston, not all the way through Arlington. And when they do the widening, which is really crucial, they're not talking about actually getting out of what they call the right-of-way. They're not going to be, actually widening the walls of the road. They're just going to be taking some of the shoulder.
Within the existing
roadway.
footprint?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And they're only widening it one way, not both. So they're widening it going into the city, but coming out, the outbound lanes will not be increased. So that's part of what's going to allow them to stay within that existing road bed.
And when the toll revenue comes in, part of that money will go to help fund regional projects.
Yes.
Now, explain the action that the board took at this recent meeting. You actually approved the application of some projects.
All we approved were requests. So,
Yes.
If only we could approve the money to go in. We can't do that. We really have one of the frustrations, I think, for the board is how little control we have over this roadway that's right in the heart of our county. And of course, it was a huge battle years ago. It's kind of a gash through the heart of Arlington. So we have a lot at stake, but really very little control. The road belongs to VDOT, and they can kind of do they want with it. So we're trying to work very carefully politically, and I think the thought was that, clearly we were going to lose this battle about trying to find mitigating effects on the traffic and congestion using transit and other ways. We call it multimodal, getting people out of their cars before we did the widening. So they're going straight to the widening, and we're not particularly standing in the way. We got to make sure that all the studies are done, and we're going to be watching it really closely. One of the things they're going to be doing is they have to redo the sound walls. And they're going to have to go on private property to do that. They're not going to stay there, and we're going to make sure that whatever they do, they're going to trample over bushes and shrubbery. But we got to make sure that they, put everything back the way it was.
And the sound walls need to be redone just because they're aging?
Apparently they're not. They weren't very well built in the first place. I don't understand all sound wall technology, but apparently they weren't very well built in the first place. And one of the things I've been looking at and we're talking about, it's not part of the agreement yet, and again, this vote was really just to make some requests to get more bus routes and get things going. And I think this board, we would like to improve transit on 66 for people, but also could they get better routes just east-west? Use maybe 50. Maybe Route 50 is the way to get some good transit routes going. And I think we're starting to get more of a political will in the region to actually do the cooperation needed to get really good transit. Because a lot of people more regional, yeah.
Yes.
What we do in Arlington doesn't matter too much if people in Fairfax and Fauquier and Loudoun don't do anything, because they're all coming in, and we've got to find a way for them to be able to get in using transit easily, and that's what we're going to need to be
and some of the projects that you approved the request for the funding for this project is improved bus service along Lee Highway, Washington Boulevard, and even Route 29 out from Dunloring to Boston.
All the way in, right?
Yeah,
right. And
so that obviously is going to help a lot of people.
It will help a lot. So we're going to be working on it. I think there's an impetus for us to just be working closely with our neighbors, and I think they're interested in working with us. So I'm hopeful, but we're going to have to stay really vigilant about this one. And then one of the things that I've been talking about a little bit, we're starting to discuss is this issue of air rights over 66. We just talked about parkland before this, and we're kind of starved for space here in Arlington. We're 26 square miles. We're not getting any more, and we need parks, we need schools, we need places to put our buses. And I realized that, we already have one parking garage on Quincy Street. There's a little parking garage that goes over I-66 with tennis courts on top.
Yes.
And I realized, whoa, if we could actually cover over 66, and maybe you have a parking deck on the lower level, but on top have a field with trees. It's expensive to do, but the technology is there. And maybe we don't build it right away, but I really would like us to have the rights to be able to do that.
And so you're looking into that?
I am absolutely looking into that. We all are. And it's really a way to start knitting our community back together. As I said earlier, it's like a gash through the heart of Arlington. And we need to start knitting ourselves back together. And I just sort of have this vision of these fields with trees, and people could just walk across 66, not even really be aware it's there. And there are a number of projects like this around the country. It's not totally unheard of. And I think it makes a lot of sense.
I actually have heard of projects like this to help wildlife go from one area to another.
Yes, there's one. Yes, I saw one in Banff, I think, in Canada, which I used to live there. And it's interesting because there's this road right in the middle of kind of nowhere, beautiful nowhere with the mountains. And apparently the animals know enough to stay on the bridge and not go across the road. So anyway, it would be lovely for animals and for people if we could do that.
That's quite a vision.
Yeah, well, it's long term, but that's kind of the business we're in here.
The county board also acted on another transportation matter at your March meeting, and you approved 2 contracts for a total of $11.6 million, so almost $12 million for county street paving. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, we got a lot of potholes. You did the setup in the beginning, and some years ago, I think it was the year before last, we'd done one of our surveys of the folks in Arlington about what they were liking and not liking. One of the biggest concerns was the condition of our roads. And so we said, whoa, and all of us driving around were noticing a lot of potholes, things that needed to be done. So we had staff came and reported to us, and they grade roads, A, B, C, D. And you have a certain amount that you want to have. I mean, you're always going to have roads that are going to need work. They're not all going to be A all the time. But it was clear that we had far too many in the C and D category, and we needed to be stepping up how we were doing our road maintenance and improving our roads. So this is part of that effort.
So you increased the funding?
We increased the funding, we did. And this time of year is when you've got potholes, and I mean, one of the basic jobs of government is to make sure that people can drive around safely and you don't have potholes in the road.
You know, you mentioned we're only 26 square miles. It's a very small county, very compact, but yet people may not realize we have more than 900 lane miles.
Yeah.
Just here. So that's a lot of
It's a lot of
street to maintain.
It's a lot of street to maintain, and you know, when you've got a winter like this with salt and freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing in all the cars, it's needs work.
An important part of our infrastructure.
Very important, yeah.
We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about a new partnership between the county and a prominent university, and hear about some of the initial recommendations from the community on ways that the county can improve our snow fighting efforts.
When some people struggle with their mortgage payments, they become frozen. But the people who take action are far more likely to get the most positive outcome. Call this free government program for the option that's right for you.
Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up, where I'm chatting with Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey about important decisions that the board took at its March meeting. One of the actions that you took just this last meeting was to approve a memorandum of understanding with Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
Oh, now what is that about?
Well, there is something called Metro Lab Network, and there's some money available in grants to cities that partner with universities to find a way to work together to use good data to make decisions to make government work better. And that's totally what we're all about.
That totally makes sense, right?
It totally makes sense. Let's use good data. And you know, we actually already do that, but this would make this makes the relationship more structured and clear, and also makes it so that we can apply for these funds, and hopefully that will happen. This is such an exciting place to be. Virginia Tech is doing really cutting edge work, and we've got a lot of issues where we need good data. You know, one of them, which I actually talked with the government representative for Virginia Tech just recently about, is like our school data. So we have ways of calculating how students get into how many students are going to be coming. They call it a generation factor. And that's important because then we've got a whole building project because we've got a plan for students. We've got to be ready for them. And I'm starting to think those generation factors are based on how we did things in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They've got formulas, and the formulas have worked fine.
Okay, yes, so this is the way we're still measuring.
We're
yes.
still measuring. But is that still the way people are going to behave? Are they going to continue to just have a family, and then as soon as they do that, decide they're going to move to Fairfax for the house and the yard and the schools? I think more and more they're going to stay here for the schools. People are actually moving from Fairfax to Arlington because of our good schools. And people more and more are not so anxious to have that house in the yard. They want an exciting, vibrant community. They may have parks and things, but they don't need all of that personal yard space.
You know, you're right. I live in a condo building, and there's a lot of kids in our building.
Exactly. So we have always been going on our planning, assuming that people are going to behave the way they've been behaving. But I think that may change. And I'm really hopeful that one of the things we can have Virginia Tech is to help us look at that and look at how people are changing behaviors and study maybe other cities that are more urban and how does that work.
You know, it's so great to be partnering with such a terrific university.
They are terrific. They really are. It's exciting.
You talked about it's the Metro Lab Network that we're partnering to apply for, and that is a White House initiative.
It is. You know, this president's really big on data and using technology and getting us into the 21st century. And I think the more we can do partnerships like this, it just makes sense on so many different levels. It's good for the university. It's good for us. It's good for our residents. I hope it works out for us.
Well, it's so great to be kind of the home of Virginia Tech.
It is.
Up
It is.
here.
Well, Blacksburg might dispute that term.
Up here.
But we're going to be their second home. We are their second home. And we have a number of really exciting other, universities here. We happen to be partnering with them, but, we don't want to forget George Mason. We don't want to forget Marymount University. And, of course, the wonderful Northern Virginia Community College system that we've got.
Some amazing institutions of higher learning right here.
Right here.
In our 26 square
George Washington
miles.
University. I mean, they have a branch. So there's, we're working on becoming really, I think of us as an intellectual hub. And if people want to get together with other smart people and do interesting research,
Absolutely,
they should be
this
here in
is the
Arlington.
place to be.
Yeah.
And finally, even though it's nice weather right now, let's talk a little bit about snow.
Yeah.
So we had this massive blizzard in January. A lot of people called it Snowzilla. And the county launched a really aggressive effort to get community feedback on how
Right.
did we do and what could we do better.
Right,
And at the meeting, the county manager shared with you results of the survey. And what did you learn? What came out of that?
Well, I learned that we're working really hard on getting better, and there's a whole lot we could do better, which we talked about a little bit the last time we were together. And I'm really pleased at the approach that our manager's taking and our staff on really, one, getting feedback from people and really examining what we're doing and does it make sense. And one of the things he announced he was doing was going to send some staff to places where they handle snow a lot more, like Buffalo, and where they deal with it, and find out what are they doing differently from what we do. One of the things they realized was we have this plan that sounds like it makes sense, which is to do in phases. You do the arterial roads first, the really major important roads. You make sure hospitals are clear, schools are clear. Last on that, those phases, were your residential neighborhoods, and particularly the cul-de-sacs. So there were people who felt like they never got plowed, and that's pretty frustrating. And more frustrating was people would talk, and I would get emails and talk to people who said, I was there, we just needed a snowplow, and it went by, the road was clear, they went by multiple times and they never came down our street. And I think that's because they were assigned to do their phase and they weren't meant to get to the street. And now we're thinking, wait a minute, maybe we will also include residential streets in some of those phases. So instead of going up and down the one arterial and just keeping that clear, they'll also
Maybe take a turn
take a
and-
turn and go into the neighborhoods, yeah. And the other thing we talked about, which is really, and I think we got very good feedback from people that this makes sense to them, is you only park on one side of the street. When we've got a snowstorm coming, you have to park on one side of the street. You got to keep one side clear, and that allows the snowplows to pass through. I did a tour of the county just after the storm, looking at how we were doing, and it was pointed out to me some residential streets where the plows would have gone down if they could have gone down, but they had cars parked on both sides of the
Yes.
street, some of them not parked well because they were full of snow, and the plow just
And
couldn't
that
get down
just,
the
that
street.
just hinders the snow
Right.
removal.
Right.
And some 3,000 people responded to this survey, so
Yeah.
there was quite a lot of community interest.
There was.
And I believe the idea of opposite side of the street parking was popular.
Popular. People absolutely like that. And we have snow emergency routes, which we need to start enforcing. So it's gotten everybody's, this got everybody's attention. Hopefully we won't forget by next fall. The manager's going to be talking about the plans in our snow plan next year. So I expect like in October, we'll probably have a presentation at our board meeting and sort of start to roll this out and let people know. Maybe we won't get snow like this, but these snows that seem to be like once in a decade kinds of snows, or once in every 25 years, all of a sudden, and they're coming like every 5 years. And I think with global
that
warming,
really was something.
It really was something short-lived, but it was a lot. We also talked about the ice storm a few days before. And that is something that I think is going to happen even more that's probably an every couple years happening event. And we had in 2012, I think, or 11, I think it was, there were people stranded on 66, on 95. I mean, wasn't just Arlington, it was everywhere in the region. People spent like the night in their car because of this ice situation. And that we've learned there's some really things that we can do, and I think we're looking at just deciding when the circumstances are set up that it's likely to happen, may not happen, likely to happen, we'll just send people home early, get them off the streets, which is what they need to do. So
Yes,
hopefully we'll do better.
Safety first.
Safety first, absolutely. And with computers and technology, it's a lot easier for people to be working all the time, no matter where they are. So we need them off the roads when they're not safe.
Well, that's a wrap for County Board Wrap-Up. Thank you for joining me and County Board Chair Libby Garvey for a review of some of the important decisions the board took at its March meeting. Remember, if you have questions for the chair, you can always email us at arlingtontv@arlingtonva.us. We hope that you will join us next month when we will be talking with the chair about the fiscal year 2017 budget. The board will be adopting that in April after a series of work sessions and public hearings.